tell you this, but Hendrick is a sound mind, and he's a good appointee. And if you want to expunge some things about Whitewater, like he said, as much as I hate to tell you this, you're going to have to go ahead and appoint him. Well, all right. Just give me a chance. Give me a little bit, President Clinton said. But let's not forget that my domestic policy people, they're not just beholden to me. They're beholden to Hillary, as well as me. And yes, I know he's a West Texas oil man trying to get my attention. So I'm trying to delay it as long as possible. Well, with all due respect, Mr. President. What, Roseanne? Oh, I got some good news from that Paula Casey, the U.S. Attorney down in Little Rock. She called me earlier this morning in my quarters upstairs and said that she was dismissing all inquiries about Whitewater. So I'm going to be alright. I'm going to be home free. You better give it a couple of days, Mr. President, because it can still backfire. Don't be an idiot. We just got to take some time to finesse things, Well, you take care of it, Mr. President. Aiken said. 12 p.m. Central. JR and Ken have fried chicken for lunch with Jim Bob Horton. JR told Jim Bob that they would go to the meeting today, but since Brad was refusing to take both he and Ken to the walkathon next weekend, JR said he and Ken would be boycotting this walkathon. I wish you wouldn't do that, Jim Bob said. What other choice do we have? Jared said. Snot-nosed prep school brat. Don't change. Ken and I will hang out with Dave Smith instead, Jared said. 1 p.m. Eastern. Jim and Claude are touring the McComas Center in Concord, New Hampshire. Back in 1984, Jim tried to help JR's prep school teacher in English and history, Elena Ramos, get on the Space Shuttle Challenger. When that fell apart and when the Challenger blew up, she thanked Jim, relieved that it didn't work out, that she didn't get into space. Today, she has been a budget analyst for the Treasury Department since 1987. 1:40 p.m. Central. Jim Bob's aunt, Carolyn, takes JR and Ken to the NFB meeting. She is very angry that Brad chose to take Jim Bob, but not JR and Ken. Jim Bob's sister Ruthie was going to be stopping by his house tonight and ream him out because he was playing both sides with Brad and Jim Bob. 2:15 p.m. Central. The NFA meeting is in full swing, and Jim Bob is put in charge of playing the walkathon. It was agreed upon that Ken and JR were not needed for the walkathon, so JR announced that they would be boycotting the function. At 2:30 p.m. Central, Mary Jo comes to pick up both JR and Ken. Both are very angry about the outcome of the meeting. I tell you, Mom is going to be pissed. Yeah, you have to admit, she was right. JR, Hilly Buck is going for a power grab, and Brad and Jim Bob are just letting her do it. My old man's gonna be pissed too. Come on, don't be surprised if neither Brad or Jim are invited to the ranch for a while. Well, who can blame your dad? I mean, the last time Brad showed up at the ranch, he made an ass out of himself. And Jim Bob, you know as much as I like him. Your dad is right. He's rude and pathetic. 4:30 p.m. Eastern at Concord, New Hampshire. Jim and Claude are having BLTs for room service, along with some almond rum and beer. 3:40 p.m. At Springfield, back at Springfield, Betsy and Elizabeth are watching a movie. JR is upstairs in his room, moping and listening to music because of what Brad said at the meeting, since Jim Bob didn't back him up. 5:30 p.m. Central. Well, I'm like Brad. I'm glad you're punctual, Karen said, as his car pulls up in front of her mother's house. How's your weekend going? Look, I don't want to talk about Brad, and I don't want to talk about Jim Bob, Gerald said. Okay, how about something pleasant like Bible study? Yeah, how about Bible study? Now, you see why I like you so much. If you could at least give Brad another chance. I told you I would think about that, Gerald said. Gerald drove them to IHOP for dinner. 6:20 p.m. At IHOP, JR orders a chicken fried steak dinner, and Karen orders the chicken fried steak breakfast. Did you know that the Scripture Club says that the cross is one of the few symbols that emblemizes victory? JR said. Does your head hurt with all the information you cram into it? Karen asked. When he rose, it became a symbol of victory and eternity, JR said in a playful mood. Now that's the JR I miss, Karen said. 7:05 p.m. Central. JR and Karen get back into the car and talk. Tell me what's on your mind, JR, Karen said. When I get back home, I know my mama is going to ask me to recite some verses from the Bible. I used to walk around with my Bible as a child and teenager, preaching, and Mama and Grandma always stopped and would notice and said that I would be a preacher. But when I was getting ready to graduate from working for Dad, he told me that I had to pick a sensible major. Well, what he doesn't know is that I chose public affairs. Why don't you tell me about your interest in social work? Well, I work with Texas Tech Students for Life. I work my afternoons when I'm not in school talking to distressed women in pregnancy centers, trying to help them keep their child and not abort. I'm also in regular contact with politicians and political science and economics students with an extra rhyme? Yeah. And I go back to them. I call my social work advocacy Karen Crowder for life. So, Karen Crowder, have I shown you that I am not like my father? Don't push it, JR. 7:40 p.m. Central. JR and Karen arrive at the house of the parents of Claudius Blue, a contemporary of JR's and his cousin, Joe Hendrick Jr. Claudius was getting ready to apply for a job with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness in Arlington, Virginia. Claudius was a double communications and psychology major with an emphasis in mental health advocacy and policy. 9:05 p.m. JR walks Karen to her door at her mother's house. I had an amazing time, Karen said. Want to try this next weekend? I don't know, JR. Just don't think it's a very good idea. Alright then, JR said. Now we go to the last leg, October 10th. 7:25 a.m. Eastern. With black coffee and cigarettes, Jim is coaxing himself through his hangover. Last night he and Claude had dinner at O'Shaughnessy's Tavern from 3 to 9, and then they headed to the hotel bar. By midnight, Jim was a rip-roaring drunk. He thinks of his son JR, who through his help had applied again for the prize of Crockett House, Gordon Hall, next year. He also knew that JR was looking into summer internships with the Heritage Foundation. 7:45 a.m. Central. Joe takes JR to Asbury United Methodist Church. JR decides instead of hurrying back to campus after church, he would at least have lunch with his mother, sister, and grandmother, and make it back on campus by 5 to 9. His feelings were raw, and he wanted to see Jennifer Bowers. At 8:30 a.m., at Asbury United Methodist Church, JR is sitting next to Brad. The two were bitterly exchanging pleasantries. The Reverend was giving a sermon on justification in the Methodist Church. 9:15 a.m. JR, Karen, and Brad are attending Sunday school on Methodist beliefs. By 12 p.m. Central, JR, Betsy, Elizabeth, and Christine are having T-bone steak, baked potatoes, and pecan pie with some sweet tea to go with it. So glad you decided to stay for lunch, JR. Just wish your father could be here, Betsy said. Dork's too busy doing politics, Christine said. Christine, JR protested. No, honey. This time I think she speaks the truth. Before long, the whole family, except me, is going to be living in Washington, D.C., Elizabeth said. Mama, you can move with us, Betsy said. Yeah. Spend my days living around crooked politicians? No thanks. I hear, JR, that you're thinking about going to Washington, D.C. this summer, Christine said. Drew's still on that. JR, quit being like Jim Bob Horton, Betsy said. He betrayed you, JR, Elizabeth said. 2 p.m. JR has packed his bags in the car and gets ready to head back to Texas Tech campus.